Hey YouTube! So this will be my first ever YouTube video, although I'm obviously familiar with the genre conventions. I typically watch videos that are either humorous or about makeup, so I do know how to create the perfect smoky eye. I have simply not done so for this video because it's the middle of the day and I'm quite busy today. But very briefly, I wanted to talk about the LGBTQIA community and its use of emergent technologies to share information and to create community. I'll be specifically discussing YouTube videos, so that's why it's appropriate that I'm making my first YouTube video. I'll talk a little bit about an article that is titled Queer Identity Online, Informal Learning and Teaching Experiences of LGBTQ Individuals on Social Media by Jessie Fox and Rachel Ralston, and a book chapter titled A YouTube of One's Own. That's Jonathan Alexander and Elizabeth Loesch. So I'll address both of those just a little bit. Pardon my smudgy mascara. I guess I'll start with the Queer Identity Online one, and I will, just to warn everybody, I will be using the word queer as a shorthand for LGBTQIA+. This is something that is debated. Some people don't appreciate the reclaiming of that particular slur, and it's not something that's recommended for folks outside of the community to do. Or some people don't like it when non-queer individuals use the term queer. So that's just your warning. Anyway, in this article, they talk a lot about these different affordances offered by emergent technologies and specifically by social media to allow for a greater amount of representation in the form of visibility, to allow for identity formation kind of related to that visibility and related to that representation, and to allow for community formation related to all these things as well. So in this article, they talk a little bit about young people in the process of identity formation, and this is even like before they come out. They talk about young people using social media to look for information, to access information, to see models and representatives of this community. This is probably the most important affordance that YouTube and other social media offers, is this ability to have that kind of visibility. Like most marginalized groups, LGBTQIA individuals are underrepresented in the media, and where they are represented, it tends to be the folks who are closest to the norm or closest to the majority. So it tends to be cisgender, gay, white individuals, predominantly men, but secondarily it's going to be women, white women, who meet all the kind of normative, they're young, they're slender, etc., etc. So people who are closest to the norm are going to be represented or overrepresented from an already underrepresented group. So what that means for young people who are trying to figure out who they are is that if those young people are gender nonconforming, if they're youth of color, if they're trans individuals, they might have a hard time seeing models of themselves in the media or on TV or in the newspapers or in the movies. So one affordance that new technology and new media offer them is the ability to see models of what they might be like, of ways that it can be possible to be a part of that community. I recall something that happened on Tumblr many years ago now. It was an instance where people were holding up a little sign that said, "This is what a feminist looks like." And the idea was to sort of promote a visual and say, here's an identity. Anybody can look like any kind of way and be a part of this identity. So in a sense, there is a community formation for the queer community in being able to, upload a video and talk about being queer and be visible as queer. Another affordance that they talk about in this particular article is a space that is not a physical space, which allows people who are relatively few in number. The best estimate we have is about 2% of the population is LGBTQIA, scattered, so not in geographical proximity to other queers. So this means that people who are very small number and scattered pretty far are able to communicate with each other and find community online. And that's something that YouTube offers as well. So in addition to that visibility, that idea of, oh, I can find models of what other people look like who identify in a similar way as me. In addition to that, you have this ability to try out these identities in a space where you can't be physically attacked, and that is a real concern for queer youth. And you have an ability to, try out isn't quite the right word. They use the term experiential learning. So it's this ability to feel what it's like to be that identity in a safer online space before you take that identity out into the world. So it's like a trial version. In this article, Fox and Ralston say, in many ways, coming out is an extended process of experiential learning. LGBTQ individuals are learning what it is like, psychologically and socially, to communicate, relate, and exist as an LGBTQ person in the social world. So they're talking about ways in which young people can express, construct, and manage their identities while also increasing representation and visibility online, which allows for other young people in turn to access that information. So that ability to share information through emerging technologies is of particular importance. In A YouTube of One's Own, Alexander and Loesch talk about specifically coming out videos. And this is a really interesting chapter. It's in a larger book about LGBTQ people and their use of emergent technologies. And I will put the book title in my blog post. They say the coming out video is an intentionally broadcast statement that attempts to negotiate the boundary between intensely personal desires and public identities. So it's really interesting. They're also talking about identity formation in the sense that you have young people saying, I feel this way. What does that mean about who I am? And now how do I express who I am to the world? And YouTube giving people a template for that in a sense. So they talk a little bit about the sort of genre conventions of coming out videos, the way in which those videos, much like this video, can be a little bit non-linear, a little bit rambling, but still have some specific conventions, specific things that they hit on. They talk about young people often sharing, here are some clues, or here's how I first knew, or here's when I suspected. And they talk about people sort of sharing why they're choosing to come forward at this moment. So there's this kind of metacognition about the moment of coming out. They also say queer activity online is about establishing and asserting identity and community. So in a sense, we are talking a little bit specifically about identity formation, but we are talking also in a more general sense about information sharing and community building. There are a couple of fairly well-known, probably more than I know about, but there are a couple of fairly well-known queer YouTubers that I can think of who are not predominantly making videos about being queer. The people I watch, one of them is Natalie Wynn, who her channel is called ContraPoints. So it's mostly about ideas. She engages pretty closely with ideas and is really brilliant and creates these video essays that are just really wonderful, and you end up learning a whole lot about all kinds of things. Capitalism, climate change. But she also is a trans woman who is also addressing issues very, very close to identity, gender, people's conceptions of those things. So there are things in her videos that do address things that are very relevant to the queer community. There are just other things as well. So the idea is that that the technology itself is giving her a space to be visibly queer, even when she's not doing a visibly queer thing, even when she's not specifically talking about being queer. So I think what I'm trying to say is that while there is this affordance that allows the community to just be visible and create a community and craft these narratives around coming out or what it means to be queer, another affordance is just doing everyday stuff while also being queer. That's kind of an affordance in itself too. That's a different kind of visibility. They talk about this as well in the YouTube of One's Own. they say, what kinds of representational practices are used by queers to figure queerness? What kinds of work, socially, culturally, personally, and politically, do such representations do, and what are their possibilities and limitations? So they're talking very, very specifically about coming out videos, but there are other means of representation that are being used in this particular format. So I think I want to wrap it up a little bit because I don't want this to get too long. I would guess, just to sort of wrap it up and recap, I would say a way in which the queer community uses emergent technologies, and specifically YouTube, is to share information, to be visibly queer while creating community sort of overtly, while talking about being queer, while doing, maybe coming out videos, maybe doing something that is an actual practice that all the queer folks typically have to do, that non-queer folks don't have to do. So producing that particular artifact is something that can be mediated by this particular kind of technology. But another piece of that is just being visible generally, being able to sort of produce all kinds of things. A goofy cooking show where everyone is drinking while they're making their food, My Drunk Kitchen. In this one, Hannah Hart, who's a fairly well-known queer YouTuber, is basically just creating a series that is mostly about comedy and a little bit about cooking, and is being visibly queer and still producing, for people who are watching, still producing a representation of what it means to be queer. But that's not predominantly what she's doing. Mostly what she's doing is wasting a lot of food and being funny. So I just want to wrap it up real quick by saying that one of the major uses of YouTube is to be funny, to be entertaining, and that's something that the queer community has really been able to make use of, entertainment and humor, in order to get their message across and increase visibility and to share information with other members of the community. And in that way, we've been able to create community using emergent technologies in a way that allows us to have a greater bit of visibility out in the world. So yeah, that's it. Thanks so much for tuning in, and have a great day.